Hey, welcome to another episode of M&A Stories. My name is Anirban Sen. I'm your host for the show today, and I'll be joined by Marcella Hall, who is the co-host of this program. As you know, in every episode, we bring in a perspective of one of the practitioners on a certain aspect of M&A and integration. In today's show, we actually have an exception. We are bringing in somebody who's been involved in extracting perspectives from practitioners over the last several years through his podcasts and his book. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together to welcome Kison Patel. Hey, Kison, welcome to our show today. How's it in Chicago?
It's sunny and hot today in Chicago.
Wow,
Hey,
it's
Kison.
hot.
Hey,
Yeah,
Marcella.
it's
Nice to see you.
nice to see you too. It's hot here in Denver as well. What's it like for you, Anirban?
In Amsterdam, today is hot. So, Kisan, you've got experience in different areas. You've got your business, you run podcasts, you've written a couple of books now, you have got people to deliver training. So, from directly from you, let's hear about who you are and what you do in the world of M&A.
Sure. My background started pretty basic, doing M&A advisory work in the lower middle market with hospitality and small financial institutions, and took a lot of those early learnings about some of the challenges and pain points of the M&A process, and took inspiration during the last recession of what I was seeing in the software industry, where they had a variety of emerging project management tools that were even starting to sprout out into other industries like education and construction, and took that as inspiration to start a company called Deal Room in 2012 to bring those modern information management practices to M&A. And that was a big struggle in the first 5 years, where you're just burning through a lot of cash and trying to get trust to get into the marketplace and get a product market fit. I think I was very fortunate that in that duration, a friend of mine in marketing was like, "Hey man, you should do a podcast." And I was responding back to him, "What the hell's a podcast?" And he said, "Don't worry about it. It's going to be the next big thing. You just got to do it." And I took that as a second level of inspiration to start a podcast focused on M&A, which led to a series of creating content and so forth and what we have today.
Excellent, excellent. And we're going to dive into your book and as well as your podcast. But before we do that, let's hear a bit about Deal Room and what are some of the challenges that kind of prompted you to start up this company?
With Deal Room, it was really around, initially it was a small scope. It was just focused on diligence management. I didn't like the idea that we had this separate tracker, and it became pretty lengthy and cumbersome. And you got to a point when once you completed the information in a diligence request, that you had follow on questions and clarification questions. And now you're trying to communicate on this Excel tracker, and thought this is a disaster and a perfect use case for a project management type of workflow to solve. So we originally solved, focused on that area. An ideal, the idea was to take it out to the market for investment banks, and quickly learned that that actually wasn't our early adopters. We ended up finding out that corporations were much more motivated to improve their M&A process because they continued to do deals and wanted to build on it. So we ended up finding a niche working with corporate development teams, and evolved it same application for the buy side as well as the sell side. So then today, if you fast forward, it's really evolved into a full lifecycle management solution, end to end, from sourcing deals,
Mhm.
doing the diligence, enabling early planning of integration, and then being able to use that same platform to execute integration all the way through, all managing it in a single database. So you're not using a bunch of different tools and having all these data silos, which inherently allows you to have better collaboration. So people are aligned together on the goals, what needs to get done, and have much smoother knowledge transfer as you move through different stages.
Thanks, Kisan, for sharing that. We wanted to chat with you about your books. And so thinking through this process, what was the inspiration? And I know you've got a couple. What was the inspiration for your first book on Agile M&A?
The first book started with in-house ideas, working with our own engineers and seeing how they talked about agile, learning what agile was. They had these techniques they would use, stand-up meetings, the way they prioritize items. and it kept referencing me back to M&A, where I kept thinking to myself, why don't we do this in M&A? This would have been so much better. This would apply really well, solve similar problems in M&A. But it wasn't until I had a conversation with James Harris at Google that really validated a lot of these initial ideas, where he walked me through several examples of how Google was utilizing agile techniques in their M&A process. And that initially took from the original idea of just writing some blog post about these ideas I had to why not create a book about it? Because if companies are actually doing it, I'm sure other companies could also learn about these practices and it could be shared. I think the next big inspiration was when I talked to Christina Amiry at Atlassian and told her, hey, I'm putting a book together about doing agile practices. And she gave me a hard time. She said, Kison, don't just write another book. Write it, make it into a framework so other companies can actually bring it and build off of it and evolve it into their own methodology. And that's what really led to Agile M&A, that essentially is a framework that introduces agile principles to be applied in M&A.
Awesome. And so you spent some time connecting with these different companies, and you've shared, you share some examples in your book. Can you share more about that process, or maybe are there any examples you are able to share with us about that were, that gave you the inspiration, right?
I think the big concepts was one with Christina. She gave a lot of transparency in how they did things at Atlassian. And I love the model of not inherently focusing on playbooks specifically, but having a broader view around creating game plans, which were defining the way you operate, essentially your operating model, how your teams are organized, how they're working together, how they're conducting meetings, sharing information, managing dependencies. And within this game plan, it's comprised of plays. And play is a technique or a step-by-step how-to of a certain way to overcome a challenge or drive efficiency. And so your game plan essentially is this configuration of plays. So the idea was each team would create their own configuration of plays based on the unique characteristics of the team and the deal that they're working on. And that's the idea of creating a game plan. Some of the examples of these plays were having stand-up meetings, where you have these quick, short status update meetings that allow you to give the quick information that people need to know and move on to it, and really try to get away from having the long, redundant meetings. Be more ad hoc to actually have meetings when you need them. Backlog was James Harris had a great example of the way they used a backlog approach to keep their diligence items, even integration items, in a descending order of priority. So it's very clear on what the highest priority items are across the deal and for the counterparty to know. And they would hone in on those top 10, 15 items and really iterate on them, which allowed them to move through the process faster, more efficiently as well. Those are a couple examples. I think retrospectives are probably one of my personal favorites. A lot of times we'll do postmortems on deals and look back and say what went good, what went bad. But that's usually after the deal's done. And sometimes you don't even have time to do that because you're on to the next deal. The idea of using retrospectives is you're doing them in a defined increment. So maybe do it once a month or twice a month, but you keep doing them periodically. You send out questions to the team ahead of time to ask them let's talk about what's going good, what's not going good. What are some of the things that we really want to preserve? And then when we share these ideas, we find opportunities to make incremental improvements that we can continuously do. So if you conduct these throughout the year and you're doing them twice a month, that essentially gives you 20, almost 25 times that you could make all these incremental opportunities to improve, which add up to significant changes and improvement. So those are just some examples from the Agile M&A book.
Right, awesome.
Thank you.
And in fact, I remember we had a few rounds of discussion around bringing in Agile into the world of M&A, especially around integration. One of the challenges that we've been facing is it's so heavily tilted. This whole thinking is so heavily tilted around the waterfall model, around you need to plan upfront, everything upfront, right to the T of what needs to happen in the post-merger integration, right? What has been your experience post the book has been released? What's been the feedback that you're getting from the market, from the practitioners about how are they adopting agile, and what are some of the challenges they're facing?
There's definitely interest in it across the board. I've been invited to go speak at companies like IBM, 3M, Johnson Johnson, and others. And there's definitely interest of being more agile, getting more value out of the company. I think you quoted it precisely. It's getting away from this very plan-driven approach where you're trying to create a very detailed plan and execute it into focusing on responding to changes as they're happening. And it's very similar parallels to the software world where people used to write these big requirement books and go out build software. Then when users use it, they realized a lot of it was based on assumptions and they need to make a lot of changes for it to really work out. But by then it may be too late. There might not be a budget or time to make those changes. When you take that iterative approach, you're making these incremental changes along the way that really allow you to get to an end state that fits the value of the needs of the user. Again, similar with M&A, we start an M&A deal, we have very little information. Through the process, we continue to accumulate information and we need to be able to respond to that information as we identify new risks and opportunities and be able to also iterate our integration plan so that by the time we hit close, we have a clear cut way to move forward and can continue iterating on that plan as we execute on it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I love what you called out. You're right that like it's a framework, and so it's adaptable and flexible for, every deal and every different integration. So thanks for those examples. So you wrote another book recently, M&A Tactics Handbook, and we'd love to hear more about it. Please share with us a little sneak peek of that book, and where did the inspiration for that book come from, if you don't mind sharing?
Now, this is an interesting one. I have a marketing manager, Mila. She does a great job of managing social media for M&A Science. And one of the things I thought she did really well was extracting quotes from podcasts. And I made a comment to her. I said, hey, you do a really good job of grabbing these quotes. Why don't we make an ebook and just put a bunch of quotes together? I'm sure people would find it interesting. Well, she started doing that, but then she started drafting a narrative that connected these quotes together. Then we talked about we align with the deal life cycle. Then I'm like, wait a minute, this is more than just this ebook. Like we got to publish a book here. So we ended up with a product that takes highlights from about 25 interviews we've done over the past year or so and pulls out these golden nuggets. But it's a fun read because it's very condensed. You can get through it in about 20, 30 minutes. But then it gives you all these different ideas and allows you to then go listen to the full interview if you're interested or wanted to hear directly from the practitioner. So it's a nice way to get this index view or glimpse into a variety of different podcasts that we've conducted.
Awesome. That is great to hear, and I can't wait to get my copy.
Absolutely, and I've already got a copy of that. So, Marcel, I'm slightly ahead of you, and I've read the book. And again, it's absolutely brilliant. Now, switching gears, and I want to hear more about your podcast journey. Right? I mean, and you've been doing it for the last few years, and compared to us, we started last year, and there's a second season. What were some of the revelations? What were some of the things that you've learned? And again, it doesn't have to be the top three or the top five, but in general, as you went along the podcast journey, what were some of these aha moments and the epiphany moments that you went through related to M&A?
In terms of learning M&A or developing a podcast?
In terms of learning M&A, and then of course we'll also hear about the learning about podcasts as well. Yeah.
A lot of the early stuff was around integration, that realizing a lot of companies, the big fail point was integration, and that integration is the stage where you either create value or destroy value. And if you're not prepared for it, probably the latter is going to happen. I think realizing what attributes to that is poor planning, and that 9 out of 10 M&A integration practitioners will tell you they wish they got involved in the deal earlier. And I think the thinking is definitely evolving and changing in the past couple of years, but it seems to be the one interesting thing realizing is here's this problem that leads to this high failure rate for M&A. And now things are really moving to have a lot more thinking on the front end of the deal to start thinking even before the deal's signed about what's the plan for go to market and allow that to evolve into the planning for integration. I think that's one of the big things I've learned. Yeah, I've realized too. There's so many pieces in doing this podcast when it comes to M&A. When you think about every optional component that gets impacted once you acquire a company and integrate it, learning about divestitures and the complexities of unwinding a company to be able to carve it out and sell it. There's a lot of different areas and things to learn in M&A.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, even in our journey, and I remember an interview that we did, this is a couple of months back with one of our common acquaintances, friends, Clint Kendrick, right? And he actually mentioned about a couple of tools. One of the tools was organizational network analysis. And that was kind of the first time I'd heard about this particular tool. But it's the ability to find the power points or points of power, points of influence in an organization, how the relationships kind of work. And that was like an aha moment for me, because literally we try and look for most of us will face that challenge anyways. But when it comes to using a tool and a template, a specific tool, that's been for me especially has been a learning journey that I'm really happy that podcasts like this can offer.
Clint's awesome. You know the
Yeah,
biggest value leak in M&A? I learned this
yeah.
from Clint. What's the biggest value leak in M&A?
What's the biggest value leak in M&A? Is the I call it the post-merger value creation through your go-to-market strategy, your revenue synergies. But I don't know what Clint said.
You're close.
Uh,
Marcel, you want to take a stab at that?
Mm, something related to people and culture, maybe.
People. Your biggest value leak is people walking away after you close the deal.
right.
Biggest value leak. And probably the biggest thing I learned from Clint is that emphasis on it. At the end of the day, it's all about the people. Again, big shift in thinking around M&A. Traditional focused on the financial modeling and modeling in synergies and all these things. But really the focus should be at the people from the beginning and through the cycle, because you want to create a good positive experience with the folks working on the deal, but more importantly, the people getting affected by the deal, that who's going to have to transition and go through this significant magnitude of change management when the deal is closed. And how do you create that a seamless experience to avoid losing people in value?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
absolutely not surprised at all, because literally people they are the kind of differentiator between a successful and a failed M&A in many cases. It's not the financial structuring business, because that's more structural, that's more mathematical, that's logical. Whereas people is where there is subjectivity, there are different alignments, etc. So yeah, I'm not surprised, but good to know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, not to keep plugging in Clint, but I feel like every corp dev practitioner should read his book.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We should have a link to like all the books, right? After this, all the books that people can go to for resources. And just to kind of double click on that as well, I think that, there are some sort of, there's sort of like some strategies that one could put into place to help retain those individuals, to incentivize them, to motivate and inspire them, to kind of share with them what this change will look like and how it's beneficial for them, to encourage folks to stay. And then also, Anirvan and I have chatted about this a lot, the two of us and with others, just thinking through like the cultures of the two organizations, and are there some efforts needed there to help folks understand the culture of the new organization and make decisions around, is that going to be adopted, or are we going to maintain the culture of the target organization? Because all of these things I think can have a really big influence on if those individuals will stay or not.
I agree. It's about being proactive. That at the end of the day, people want to be in the know. And when they're not in the know, that's when they get concerned. And it's interesting that people have a tolerance of both the good and bad news, as long as they're in the know. If they're not in the know, then it creates the FUD, and that's when people are going to be very vulnerable to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And now let me ask you another question, kind of related to this, which is we've been speaking to a lot of people, and we have spoken to a lot of people, Marcella and I, over the past several months. One thing that keeps coming back is the lack of awareness or the amount of ignorance that exists around the frameworks, the tools, the templates that could be used in the post-merger integration. Not so much in the pre-merger or the before the deals get signed, but literally in the post-merger integration. Now, is that systemic? And if it is, then why do you think that is? Or do you have another opinion, another experience on that?
In terms, I mean, I guess the frameworks almost are very functionally divided. You know, it's like HR has their own set of tools that they use. Like you gave an example of is assessing the influence and leadership in a company, and then you'll see different frameworks within other functions as well, as we move to building out the go-to-markets and things of that sort. So I think there are some component. I think that the challenge with the industry is it's the industry itself. It operates in a silo, and everybody's so disconnected that they've all created their own processes and approaches to do these common elements. When ultimately everybody's trying to achieve the same results, they want to maximize value and the opportunity that they're pursuing. I think the thing the industry ultimately needs is more transparency. I think that's one of the things we took from Agile M&A is creating an initiative to open source plays and actually posted them openly on the website, just saying, hey, if you do have some of these tools, templates, let's just put it out there publicly, allow those that want to learn and share, be able to do that and start identifying what actually works. Hence the theme of M&A science, that a lot of M&A is driven off of evidence. Can we identify what actually works and prove it and be able to start standardizing or finding these best practices and making them clear?
I like that thing that you mentioned about functional thinking, and I think that's so true because literally very few, very few organizations and very few people that we've interacted with actually think of it at an organization level, apart from going beyond the due diligence, and that's where part of the struggle is the interdependencies, the connections between the two. But I'm glad that you highlighted that part as well. Now, I know Marcella, you have a couple of questions that you wanted to ask. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is kind of from before we started the recording where we were talking about community. Kison, we think you've been doing an amazing job of building an M&A community. I know you were talking about, next level platform and all that, but we think you've been already building a great community of M&A practitioners. And just curious to know, what's your secret there?
I think it all starts with having a compelling vision. And I would say beyond a vision, a mission. When we started it, it was an idea essentially to create a platform that enables practitioners to share lessons learned and in turn identify what are some of the proven techniques that we can learn from these qualitative interviews with practitioners that share their experience. I think that's the most important part. I wouldn't just start trying to create a community to create a community, but have a real purpose and mission behind it.
Mhm. I think what I've observed is also, just kind of connecting with folks, and then you've, been great at facilitating introductions, right? So like, how did we connect? You and I connected on LinkedIn, and then you introduced me to Clint, and then Clint introduced me to Anirvan. So it's like this network, right? That you're building out from one introduction to the next.
I was told early in my career as a professional, one of the best gifts you can give to somebody is a thoughtful introduction. So
Love
I've
that.
just I've carried that around, and it's been a great tool to build relationships. Sometimes I get a lot of intros that are not thoughtful, and it's hard to entertain all of them. But I think when you do make those thoughtful introductions, it does create a lot of value in a lot of ways.
Yes, 100% agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's gift of introduction is something that I've started doing. I wouldn't say I'm good at it yet, but it's a start. But I think that's an awesome um, gift to connect people and offer from your side. Now, you've been building this community. You've got your podcast. You've got your M&A Science. We haven't spoken about the M&A Science Academy, right? I mean, that's your learning school. So tell us a bit more about that part.
Yeah, something that we didn't really necessarily plan for or have a big vision around. We were podcasting during COVID, had the idea to do virtual events. We noticed a lot of organizations were canceling their events and not pivoting quickly to digital delivery platform, which we thought, wait a minute, that's not how you should do things. Well, we sprung up and started our own online virtual events that took off and were popular. The feedback we got from those events was that participants wanted to know the practical how-tos of M&A, which got us thinking and looking at the M&A training space, that there's a variety of different programs offered, whether through the well-known business schools or workshops or consulting firms. And we realized they're all pretty crappy, that a lot of them had curriculums that weren't updated in 10 years, that the idea was to condense all this training in a 1 week workshop, and that's not going to be enough. They were very broad and shallow, not very practical. So we came up with the idea of why not creating something that's modern, that follows today's way of learning, that's designed around today's education trends, micro learning and these formats. Why don't we build around a just-in-time delivery model? Because let's face it, the person that has to build an integration planning budget isn't going to do it until they have to do it. So can they create a resource where when they do come to that time and they need to create it, they can access a resource that provides a template with a practitioner that walks them through the template and explains the thinking behind it and how to use the template. And that became the basis for creating an online academy to provide this type of ongoing training as a resource. That our thinking is you shouldn't condense this training into a week and really try to crunch it into your brain at one time, but that if you as a practitioner should continuously learn maybe an hour a week and keep developing this as an ongoing skill. So that originally became the goal, and it's evolved where we recently launched a diversity scholarship to encourage those women, minorities that may be underrepresented in the industry to get exposed to M&A as a career path, and also give them an opportunity to get the same level of training and tools that we continually press, because our secret sauce is that we have actual people that do M&A deals that trained on the platform, not folks that haven't done a deal in 10 years.
That's so great to hear. Thank you for sharing about the scholarship as well. I was just going to comment from what I had seen about the Academy that it seemed like, if you're new to M&A, there was an overview, that folks could watch to kind of like get a better understanding. And then, if you're not new to M&A, but, you want a little bit more information or insight on a particular topic, that you could kind of drill down on that. So really love how you put that together.
And also, I wanted to do a bit of drilling down on the pricing model that you put in place. I think the emphasis is on continuous learning, which is why you have a subscription model versus a per training pricing. I don't know if you have per training pricing, but I've seen the subscription part. What kind of drove you towards the subscription thinking?
I like offers that are undeniable value, where you just buy it without thinking about it. The value's there and you can't argue it. And when you can say, look, we're going to give you access to all this training that we've continuously compiled over years, the tools, the events, everything in there, I feel like $100 a month or whatever the price may be when someone's listening to it, because the more value we create, the price goes up. But again, that was the idea, was it created compelling value, I think was the goal there. And I think for us too, it wasn't so much that we're creating this as a main business line. It was, we wanted to do something different. And this is a different model than podcasts. Podcasts, you can it's not much of an investment. You can go do some editing and put some little images and post it and promote it. We wanted to really spend the effort to have editors create courses dearly, and it's a lot more expensive to do it that way. To build the quizzes, the outlines, the badges, and all these things, and there are soon to be certifications around this. So I think that was the idea, was to at least allow us to have those resources to keep developing and evolving it, but primarily with the goal of making a real value add resource for the M&A community.
So, Kishore, I think that's wonderful. I mean, we have done podcasts. You've got your own business deal room. You've got M&A Science Academy. You have done a couple of books. That kind of brings us to the next question. What's next? What's got the future got in store for us?
Well, I think I'm a tech geek at heart, so I'm going to start with the technology side first. I think analytics. We talk a lot about AI and these various technologies, which I do think they'll evolve and become more practical. I think just analytics is behind. When we look at real tools, these BI products out in the market that allow us to do really interesting analysis on our company and make more data-driven decisions, it's not so much, it's behind on the way it's applied to M&A. There's a few sophisticated firms that are using BI technology, and I think that's the next area that we're going to evolve in, is bringing that technology into a format that's easy to apply in the transactions as you work through them. And what does that mean? Being able to better scope out a deal, so you know the resources that you need to apply and who needs to cover what part, to make sure you got a very comprehensive and effective diligence that's done. Being able to better analyze the financials and really pull more of the full picture in as you see all this information uploaded in the data room. The big thing on the HR side, visualizing the org structures to understand where the redundant roles are and start planning for the post plan. I think there's a lot of opportunities there with just using the analytics side. And then as the machine learning aspects of it evolve too, you can start taking some of the basic diligence and applying some of that fundamental thinking to start looking at some things and surfacing what are some of the key things to look at. Contract analysis is a good one. There's a handful of companies that do that, where, for example, there's a lot of HR contracts, a lot of vendor contracts that need to be reviewed on all these M&A transactions, and they're very redundant. Most of them are based on the same template. So having somebody manually do that when there's a lot of redundancy clauses that haven't been touched, where you can have a system that'll allow you to quickly identify the unique changes and be able to really focus on those, which is more of the material pieces. That technology is emerging, but it's complicated to use right now. It's like you need a little mini degree to be able to use a lot of those tools. But seeing that evolve into something that's really simple that any practitioner can utilize in a deal is going to be another area where we'll see more of the AI technology actually be applicable. Otherwise, there's a lot of interesting marketing hype around this stuff in today's time. So I think the other part where we mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of practice is integration thinking from the beginning, is really shifting from just modeling out the synergies, but to get the executive team of the target company thinking about integration from the beginning. That what's the go-to-market plan, and there's going to be a lot of good outcomes of it, because then they may be more committed to those changes. They may want to stick along and be part of that vision. So being able to really work with that management team to create that go-to-market, and then a lot of these agile things, I see that trending. We've already, from the book, I've seen a lot of European companies respond and seeing them adopting a lot of these techniques. But it's being able to have that agility to move quickly on this information that allows you to have much better results when the deal's done. Have that strong people focus, the transparency, teams aligned around goals, and that real drive and excitement that these M&A deals should bring, not the chaos and headaches that they have currently. But so that those are probably the two areas from a technology perspective and a practice perspective.
I like that. bringing the drive and excitement, not the chaos and headaches. Nice. Kison, so what do you see as the future on community building as well?
That's a good question. When we think about our own efforts, for us, we've done well in creating content that we've crowdsourced and leveraged the podcast platform and other venues, events, and so forth to pull together best of class practitioners to be able to share their practices and experiences and lessons learned. I think the next is more of the peer-to-peer format, that we really need to create a way to enable practitioners to connect with each other and have the community a little bit more tightly knit. So it's easier to have a network of your peers that you can go to. I'll tell you, for 3 years in Chicago, I chaired the FinTech CEO Roundtable group. And even today, I'm still tied to those CEOs. The format was great too. We basically had 6 to 10 CEOs get together, maybe about once a quarter, and basically would go around, and each person had an opportunity to share with the group what was the biggest challenge they faced today. And everybody weighed in on it for 10, 15 minutes, and we just rotated around. So it's such a valuable resource because as a CEO, you come across all different challenges, especially as your companies are going through different growth curves.
Mhm.
That at any point in time, whether it's building the sales function, marketing function, dealing with PR firms, I can reach out to this network of CEOs and know them and get a quality level of advice for them as needed when needed. And I think that M&A needs that. Like, we have these periodic conferences where we get together, but I think we could create more of these tightly knit networks, and things are coming back to person again. And I think
Yeah.
we can amplify that and even value it and maximize the value of those in-person opportunities to really create these M&A meetups and whatnot. And even the virtual stuff is really good because
Mhm.
it's great to network with people across the pond and get ideas from what they're doing, because they are thinking about M&A in very different ways.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Okay, one other question for you. If you were to be giving advice for someone who is just about to embark on, an M&A integration, what sort of advice would you give to them?
If they were going to embark on a integration,
And let's
um,
say it's maybe their first.
I think, the big theme I've heard from all the interviews I've done with integration practitioners, a lot of it comes down to communication at the end of the day. And I just, you got to create the energy. You got to be very proactive, and you have to over communicate everything. Because as mentioned earlier, when you don't have that communication, there's this uncertainty that gets created, and that could ripple
Right.
across. So I really think just being highly, highly proactive and over communicating, really trying to get as much touch points as you can, be it in person, through various forms of communication, really getting clarity on answers that questions or answers to questions that various folks may have, whether it's the employees, the vendors, and so forth. I think the other part is plan early. You got to plan early as possible, especially if you can get the leadership of the target company involved, because they're going to have the biggest influence from the other side, if and really get that level of energy for the organization to want to be open to the changes that are necessary to combine the entities. So I really think that needs to happen as early as possible and get the buy-in from the management team of the target company.
Thank you.
Those two are awesome points. And in fact, communication is often the underlying challenge in most M&A integrations. Um, Also because they tend to be more broadcast rather than engaging. And that's why, Marcella and I and some of the other practitioners, we've spoken about this a few times. Communications tend to be more broadcast than engaging different groups of people. And your thoughts on plan early, literally start at the strategy slate, and then as you engage the uh, target leadership, make sure that they understand on how you plan to evolve the organization. Make sure your leadership understands on how, when this company, as and when it gets bought, will be evolved. I think those two are Brilliant points. Now, I wish we could speak for at least another few hours. I'm sure we'll find topics to talk about. There's so much of interesting nuggets, golden nuggets that you have in your head. Before we disappear, any final words of wisdom for our listeners and viewers?
I'm a big advocate of the M&A as a practice. I think it's highly underexposed. I think when there's a stereotype, we think of M&A, we think of analyst and investment bank, and there's so much more to it. There's, I don't know, probably 50, 100 roles that I know of. You may know of them even better that are related to M&A, and require all different types of skill types. And I think the diversity is really important as well when we think about organizational cultures and so forth. So I think I'm just a big advocate of introducing M&A as a career path, and encourage those in M&A to try to introduce it as well, because it is much broader than what's stereotyped. I think that's our big goal with the Academy, and we do have a scholarship program to encourage folks as well to get involved and learn as well, just if they may want to have general interest and get a sense of what it's actually like, and hear and learn from practitioners that are actively in the industry. And that we actually have a website they can apply. It's mascience.com/scholarship. But they can go through and read through and be able to apply for a scholarship there and have an opportunity to just learn and see if it's a fit for them. Same way, I mean, people ask about programming. I took, I think it was Code Academy, took the class there and realized quickly it wasn't for me. So I'm hoping we can create a similar type of opportunity for those that may have interest in M&A, that they can get exposure and see if and I personally think that there's just so much diverse skill set involved with M&A that there is a type of role somebody would likely find interesting in some part of it somewhere.
Nice. I love that. Just get the exposure, and you'll if you just get a taste, you'll see, right? Is this for me? Do I want to continue on this path, or
there's too many. The majority of people in M&A are accidentally fell in M&A for some reason.
That's true. That's a great call out.
That needs to change. I think we can expose it. It's a legit career path. We have a lot of little niche career paths that we introduce at the collegiate level, but I think M&A should be more prominent, because it's a great field, it's a great industry, and we're only going to see M&A continue to grow. It's just organizations have to. It's more, if things are evolving quickly and they need to be able to stay relevant, they have to continuously innovate. And for a lot of large organizations, the fastest, cheapest way to innovate is through acquisitions.
Yeah. Kison, we'd love to hear, or we'd love for you to share your contact details. If there are folks out there that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Sure. Probably LinkedIn. They could follow me on LinkedIn. I think if you add me, it requires an email, which is just kison@mascience.com. But those are probably the best two ways. I'm not very active on other social media platforms.
Awesome. This has been fascinating, Kison. Thanks for sharing all your insights and words of wisdom there. Definitely I've taken notes on a few of them for sure. I can use it both in my projects as well as in my podcast. And that kind of brings us to the end of the show. So I would like to thank, on behalf of both Marcella and I, thank you, Kison, for taking our time and sharing your insights about the world of M&A. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. And now to the most important part of the episode.
Hey, I hope you all enjoyed this interview. If you want to continue getting more great content like this, please send a big thumbs up and like the podcast, as well as subscribe on YouTube or any major podcast platform that you listen to. Thank you very much for listening, and here's to the deal.
Thank you so much, Kison, for doing the last part. And till next time, thank you and bye-bye.